Hi, everyone. It's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new here. Each week, I come on YouTube Live and talk about our weekly newsletter. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the April 24, 2026 weekly newsletter. If you have been here for a while, you know the goal is to get the newsletter out on Wednesdays at no specific time. This week, I was delayed. We're still going through some changes with the organization and workload, and I was teaching the certified pool operator class this week. Not to make excuses, but life happens. You guys know this as aquatic professionals. Things just come up and they hijack your week. But we're here now, and I'm so glad you're here with me to talk about this week's newsletter. I'm going to pull that up on the screen. As always, the detailed newsletter is linked in the description box down below. Please do consider subscribing to receive it in your inbox directly when it comes out each week. If you prefer to listen to me talk about the whys and the wherefores of what I included, that's what we're going to be doing right now. This week's newsletter for April 24th, 2026 is entitled Reasonably Foreseeable Problems. One of the things I really wanted to touch on in this newsletter is that even those of us who are very organized, detailed planners, who think through our tasks, our routines, our priorities, our deadlines, and what needs to get done, some of us, myself included, we still sometimes have a blind spot about friction points or potential problems on this schedule. And the example that I gave was myself this week in terms of the weekly newsletter. I've been doing it for over a year now and consistently work on the weekly newsletter throughout the week. So this may not be efficient in, kind of leadership principles or any of office hacks or things that you see on the internet, but I very much work on the newsletter throughout the week. I don't love to sit down and read all of the news at once in, let's say, a 4-hour block. I like to read the news as it comes in throughout the week, different industry newsletters, different Google News alerts, LinkedIn. I'm seeing project updates. I'm being sent tips from subscribers and followers and colleagues. So I'm constantly building each week's newsletter. And then the last thing I do is an op-ed feature and decide what videos to include. And when I teach a certified pool operator class on Zoom, this is typically once a month for our schedule in 2026. When I teach a certified pool operator class, that obviously changes my weekly routine. And I'm not mad about it. I love teaching the certified pool operator class. I love having the opportunity to help people better understand their pool systems and know their pools better. But for any of you who've taught before, whether it's aquatics or recreation or any personal passion that you might have for coaching your kids' youth sports or religious groups or leadership, it takes a lot of preparation and planning and effort to do it well and not waste people's time. So about 20 hours this week was taken up by the certified pool operator class. And so I'm correspondingly not as responsive on email and projects and deadlines. And so I very much try not to schedule those items during a certified pool operator week. I know that, but yet somehow each month when the CPO class aligns with the newsletter, I'm constantly struggling to keep up with getting the newsletter out on time. Now, if I wasn't undergoing changes with a new staff member who's going to be taking a bunch of items off my plate over the next couple of months, that if I could do the newsletter each and every week that has a CPO class, because it's obviously not working. What I've been doing is not working, and insanity is defined by doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. But I'm going to keep up with it for another few months because I feel that once this person is fully onboarded, they'll be able to help me in other ways that will leave me more time on these particular weeks to continue with the newsletter. Now, the tie-in for everybody else who's listening to this or reading the newsletter each week is I do think it's important that we look at our calendars, whether it is at home, reasonably foreseeable to be a problem. know their problems subconsciously calendar in advance as a problem, and that's why they keeping up on us again and again. And to that vein, one of my recommendations that I've had probably maybe the last year, the last 2 years, really looking at our accomplishments, our to-do lists, and our priorities on a weekly basis instead of when I think back to being in high school, undergraduate degree or graduate degree, everything was framed as a semester. And yes, there were day to day, week to week, month to month deadlines, but everything was framed over the course of a longer time span, like a semester or an academic school year. And it's really interesting to me. I've been in the workforce now full time since graduate school. So, what is that? 15, 17 years. And we've shifted both not my preferences, large has really dialed down now. I think when I started, we were still focused on semesters, like program course terms, whether that was 8 weeks or 12 weeks, a couple months of the pool program is going to have a certain schedule, let's say from April to June, and July and August are going to be different from September to December. And in 2026, in the work world outside of aquatics, everybody is so day to day driven. The 24-hour news cycle has become the 24-hour social media cycle, the 24-hour email cycle where people are working outside of quote traditional work hours. And so I wanted to bring it back to looking at weekly accomplishments, weekly to do lists, weekly things in our work plan, and then accomplishments monthly, because I don't think it's realistic anymore for us to say, I want to get this done in a day. That's assuming that every day of the work week is equally efficient, is equally successful. And I think it's more realistic to look at the month. How many days do we have in a month? Because we all have ebbs and flows in our energy, priorities, things happening with your family or your friends, other things going on. And so, without belaboring the point, because we all know this, we're busy and things crop up, I think we need to get away from the day to day work cycle and look at it weekly and monthly. We need to identify those friction points. I know I'm super guilty on the phone of over committing to things that via email I would stop and take more time to think about what is a reason time do I need to actually do this preparation. But on the phone, I don't think about it as much, or I feel pressured to respond quickly right away, not to stall and think about it. And so I know that's a gap for me. Probably have similar gaps, although they're not going to be necessarily the same. And so I thought that was just a framing tool that I needed to bring back to mind. You might be the same. I also shared a great photo this week. I'm not sure how well you can see it. Let me just zoom in here. This was from a conference I attended last week here in the town of Okotoks. It was a strategic planning session offered to local businesses and the community. And one of the things I took away from that conference was a classic Venn diagram that we've experienced in aquatics or recreation, where people want, especially if you're a municipal pool manager, you're working for town administration, ratepayers, residents, they want stable services, they want low taxes, and they also want low population density. And yet they're not willing to give up or undertake higher taxes or service delivery cuts or accept more density. All of these things are competing, conflicting, aligned. And then the middle portion of everything is that this reality does not exist. And as I'm starting to see the articles trickle in about, wait lists for summer swim lessons, or people who are stressed out because they can't get their kids into swim lessons this summer, I thought of a lot of colleagues and, just the industry where we are constantly being asked to. As always, the second part of the weekly newsletter is a rundown of different aquatic industry news articles and things. It was a slower week in terms of the volume. The density of these topics is quite deep in terms number of articles pertaining to these same stories. So the number one big story that came out on Sunday and Monday this week was a Brazilian woman who experienced a fatal drowning at an Ironman Texas event. So an Ironman event being an open water swim on a bicycle followed by running. And by counts, this individual, they submerged in the water and they were not located. Their body was not located until many hours later in an outdoor body of water. I believe it's a lake. I'm not sure if it's man-made or artificial. And that also contributed to difficulty finding her because of the cloudy conditions in the lake. And a dive team had to be called to the site to locate her. So I did share a couple of articles drawing back to the most recent incident that it brought games, drowning fatality of Lazar Dukic back in August of 2024. I did link in the description box, link with flags as well to some of the different YouTube videos that we've done on this. I am in no way qualified to speak to open water or intense endurance, events, but I did interview and have panel discussions with people who do have that expertise. So, for example, Dr. Katie Cleesby, who did her PhD research thesis on lifeguards and open water events. She herself is a multiple time Ironman finisher. And so she has a lot more expertise to speak to this, as well as some of the commentary that's all wrapped up in the videos from 2024. I do have a panel discussion scheduled with Dr. Katie, as well as some of the other speakers I've spoken with in the past for this upcoming week. And I will share that on the YouTube channel as soon as it is available. I have a lot of questions about the special dispensation or special permission that Ironman received to use this lake after I believe it's the fire chief or maybe the police chief is on record in a linked article that I provide stating that the low visibility and construction debris of this lake is a reason that it's not typically used for special events. So if there's construction debris, it may be the case that this lake is man-made, it's artificial, but it could also be construction debris is, it's been dumped there, like vandalism, dumping. I'll have to do some more research before our panel discussion next week. But I just have a lot of questions, and there's a lot of mud being slung, alleging that the victim, she was sick prior to the incident, as though this is somehow not the fault of the organizers. There's also always the question about air travel prior to Texas in April. This individual comes from Brazil, and it gets quite hot in Brazil. That I have, there was one report I saw that that people saw her descend as though she was, they saw her failing to be able to hold herself up, and then she disappeared. If that's the case, why did people not stop the race, not notify organizers? Why did nobody stay near the location to be able to identify her, like stay near the surface? So this is going to be, I'm sure, like the CrossFit Games drowning fatality, it's going to take us a while to get more details, and especially to the extent that the family is willing to share what they know. But then also from a defensive perspective, the Ironman organizers may not be forthcoming beyond what is necessary by law enforcement with details, because they have their own interests at play. And that is one of the reasons where often these endurance events, they don't employ lifeguards from a financial compensation. They use volunteers to create frameworks to limit liability and negligence claims. I'm not making any claims at this point. I was not there. I have no secret information. I haven't even read all of the news reports. I'm going to be doing that before our panel discussion next week so that it's fresh in my mind, as well as current, because sometimes when you jump on the bandwagon of early reporting that is not firsthand, it has been my experience that the story evolves and changes. And it's only in terms of seeing first-person sources that we're able to have a clearer perspective on what might have happened. With the case of Lazar Dukic, we did have that TV footage, unfortunately, that showed him struggling and then falling beneath the surface. That was pretty significant to our last discussion of this incident. So stay tuned for that. Please do consider subscribing to our YouTube channel to see that video posted as soon as I can get it edited. Also this week, the actress Nadia Fares was taken off of life support after being found unconscious in a swimming pool. And this is a great example of a tragic incident where non-fatal drownings or drowning are just as terrible with critical consequences. The best headline that I saw that explained this very clearly was that she was in a coma after a serious accident in a pool. Just wish that journalists took the time to be more careful about the language that they use. And I really wish language style guides could be improved and we could forget some of our terminology that's out there, like near drowning. You guys have heard me say this before. If there is a submersion in liquid, there is a drowning. Drowning does not have to be fatal, but there is active submersion. There was a drowning incident. But I've certainly been trolled on social media, on Facebook for being, quote, they were telling me I was imprecise in my language, whereas the trolls had older language and did not necessarily understand the science. Dr. Justin Sumsrott, the medical director of Stargard Elite, is very clear, and I respect his research and his professional opinion. If there is a submersion of any type, whether it's short or long, leads to death or otherwise, it is a submersion, right? There is a drowning. The English word drowning can be a bit confusing. So let's say a submersion. There is a submersion, whether it has fatal consequences like morbidity, critical complications, or otherwise. But I'm going to step off that high horse for right now because that's not why you're here. Many of you are water safety professionals who agree with me and who follow the same perspective that we need to update our language and we need to do better in terms of tracking statistics, because it's not just about drowning fatalities. It's about all submersion or water immersion related injuries. Big headline, but it was very tough to find more than one or two sources for this one. The Minnesota court rules that Swimply pool rentals can be considered public pools and need licenses. This is huge. Those of you who know, I feel very strongly about the commercial use of residential pools. That presentation is forthcoming on YouTube, I promise. While we've had some staffing changes the last 2 months, I haven't been able to edit as much YouTube content as I normally would, but it is in queue to get that presentation up on YouTube. I think, the first 20 minutes of edits last weekend. Do I think this will stand? Not necessarily. I think Swimply will take it to the Supreme Court if they can, at least the Minnesota Superior Court. They are going to challenge this until the cows come home, I'm sure, because it creates an important precedence. If this is the first time you're hearing me talk about this topic, just for a little bit of context, I'm not suggesting that all residential pools need to be treated 100% the same as a commercial pool in the sense like a water park or an Olympic pool. But I do think there needs to be some ramifications and some licensing and some parameters for taking a residential pool and making money, like using it for commercial purposes. And so what that looks like could depend on the state. North Carolina, some specific counties have gone the route of having specific criteria and a specific type of permit. It's not saying a home pool is the same as a water park, but I do think we need something because the risk of drowning, of entrapment on non-VGBA drains, older pools with older mechanical, questionable construction standards, because a lot of residential pools do not have the same safety and construction requirements as commercial pools. I just think this is good for water safety and we need to see something like this. So super, super excited, but also pragmatic that it may not stand. This week, I also shared an article from Fun World, which is the IAPA magazine. I try and catch up on those every few months. And so this was an article I read from a recent edition. Condition monitoring allows rides, like amusement rides, to talk to us. There was a feature on Aqua Arabia, the water park in Saudi Arabia that recently opened. There's been some confusing language regarding the quote grand opening. Initially, the grand opening was scheduled for Eid al-Fitr after Ramadan in March of 2026, roughly the last part of March. Then we've had obviously the war in Iran. If you're watching this in the future, war, dispute, conflict, whatever you want to call it. And it's resulted in a huge drop in tourism and flights to that region. So they didn't, as far as I know, have like a worldwide grand opening. It was put off. And then I was speaking with an influencer I know just yesterday, actually. I will not name check them, but they said that they had planned to go to Aqua Arabia to feature the water slides, but they've changed their trip because when they were in touch with the PR department at Aqua Arabia, not all of the water slides were complete in terms of they're built, but either they're not running or they're not commissioned. They didn't give me any details, but they have delayed their trip at least another couple of months. So obviously, when you're talking about $1 billion water park, you want to get it right. And so it wasn't surprising to me that they may still be working out the kinks. Also, especially because water parks in these hot climates like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, Egypt, etc., those are relatively new in the last 20 years. And so we do know that there are extreme environmental conditions like the very, very strong heat in the desert, sun exposure, extreme weather conditions make commissioning and safety concerns quite different from maybe something that is outdoors in British Columbia or, Washington State or Italy, etc. I shared an article pertaining to the country Ghana in Africa. They are trying to tackle ongoing drowning cases that they have. Swimming has lifted, the first major restriction on Russian athletes for the 2028 Olympics in LA. So as you might recall, Russia invaded Ukraine a number of years ago, and there have been sanctions against Russian athletes representing the Russian Federation. Some Russians are competing independently. Others are they've gone to other countries that have accepted them for different citizenship claims. But this is the first move in terms of lifting specific restrictions on Russian athletes in advance of the next Olympics. I shared an article pertaining to water restrictions that are being tested in Texas because of a drought, but also trying to balance the demand for access to outdoor swimming pools in the heat of the summer. There is, I thought this was kind of funny, but very typical of council when you deal with the community and development. There was a quote, secret water line associated with a water park project called Parrot Island that was brought up to council and a discussion about disclosure and privacy. And this brought to mind an article also that I read this week pertaining to Washington, D.C., where a local resident, I didn't include it in this week's newsletter, but a local resident had sent a very long letter to the editor of the Hill Rag regarding the forthcoming design of a new aquatic facility in Washington, D.C. And she had done a really nice job about talking about some of the deficiencies with the proposed design. And she had some really good data in terms of swim lessons and groups. And I sent her an email because I thought the time that she took to write this letter with a lot of details was unusual based on my experience as a municipal pool manager who would interact with the community and ratepayers, as well as with knowledge that it takes to write her type of letter goes beyond what the average swimmer typically has in my experience. She had really taken some time to do some research and think through her points. And I sent her, great job on your piece, and I appreciated its detail. And she wrote back saying, well, how can we get them to listen to me? Which I understand the thought process, same as I do here. Not everybody is always up to speed on what local government is doing, what they've approved. And when we have a task force or a committee to design and construct a new pool, there's a ton of stakeholders there. There's residents, there's staff, administration, developers, service providers, local youth groups, nonprofits, and you have to summarize voices. You can't get in the weeds of every single item, same as a budget meeting or same as a capital projects meeting. And so, unfortunately, that does mean that sometimes people who are not involved in it day to day or ever, they miss details. So, I don't doubt it's not a secret water line, but it wasn't also a popular line item like a water slide might be, or other more exciting aspects of the project. Another article I shared this week that really had me kind of chewing on what it means, even though we don't have a ton of details, is there was a court case associated with a 25-year-old man drowning after swim lessons at a fitness club. So this is a swimming pool in a fitness club. This individual was learning how to swim with a instructor, and then after the class ended, the instructor left and the learner, the student, remained in the pool, and they were not a good swimmer, hence why they were registered in the program, and then they experienced an emergency and they died. And so the questions that I have myself, I'm not trying to assign blame, but I'm just trying to understand what happened, because I have experienced this a lot myself teaching adult swim lessons. The adult learner will often stay after class. They're entitled to do so. They've paid admission or they have a membership. But I always taught lessons in the framework where there were lifeguards on deck. So that person might stay past their lesson into public swim, into lane swim, and work on the skills that we have practiced. And that's an important component of being successful in learning how to swim. You do need to practice. You can't just ideate at your computer what it's going to look like. So I do question what happened in terms of the swim instructor had to leave. The lesson was over. Are they responsible for policing an individual who wants to practice those skills in an unlifeguarded environment? Probably not. They're an autonomous person. If the signage is posted, swim at your own risk, and there's no safety guarantees, I don't know who's responsible, but I would imagine it could be the swimmer, the student. I don't know the framework of that organization. I don't know what responsibilities at that facility the instructor had, if there were supposed to be lifeguards or video cameras. But I thought this was an interesting case because this is a very real world example that I might have seen in my career. The Yukon government says it has no plans to restore the Ross River community pool. It is really, really sad story, but definitely indicative of our current economic conditions, especially when we talk about, unfortunately, a territory like the Yukon in the northern part of Canada, where the population density is relatively low and access to supplies is really, really difficult. We've seen the same thing with the recent construction of the Yellowknife Northwest Territories pool, as the Iqaluit pool. Significant delays, significant cost overruns associated with flying to the Northern Territories, shipping in materials, delays getting technicians and service providers up there. I would imagine there's at least a 30 to 40% increase on materials and labor up north versus down south. I shared an article from the Masters Golf Tournament, which pertains to the Ray-Ban Meta sunglasses, and their ability to photograph, videotape discreetly private events. And I wanted to share this because obviously we've been talking the last few newsletters about these issues, potential issues with smart glasses, as well as any type of recording device that's not obvious. So that is something I felt was a good example of how this is not just an aquatics and recreation issue, but this is a larger conversation. If you went to a concert that was meant to be phones only, or even a wedding that was meant to be no phones, no recording devices, there's ways to pass these security measures if you know how to. They're not checked as carefully. Link to ILCIRA, the International Lifeguard Critical Response I've been aware of them for a number of years. I've seen their board members and founder at conferences and seen articles in magazines and know different trainings that they've offered, but I didn't think I'd ever shared it in the newsletters. So I did attend a webinar yesterday for the World Water Park Association, where Tyler Anderson, the founder and one of the principal board members, to the World Water Park Association membership base. So I did want to go ahead and share ILCIRA here. It's not a topic I personally have a passion for, but I do know that it has a real importance in our industry. Their main focus is identifying that lifeguards can experience critical incident stress after successful and unsuccessful rescues, and that there needs to be a mechanism to support these lifeguards and make it lifeguard specific, as opposed to historically, in my work experience, lumping lifeguards into firefighters, police, frontline, first responders. I also know there's a parallel movement to have lifeguards designated as first responders. I saw a post yesterday, Life Saving Hawaii. I believe it was in Kauai or maybe Kona, that lifeguards there, surf lifeguards, are being recognized as first responders, which respectfully in the surf environment is definitely long overdue for the role that they play and the professionalism that they maintain. I'm not sure that this is like I said, not my personal passion, not where I place my focus, but I do recognize that this is a big issue for lots of aquatic facilities. Tyler did share in the webinar yesterday that he'd been recently speaking to a lifeguard who, content warning, had cut down somebody that they found who had committed suicide via hanging and was doing compressions, CPR. And that would obviously be very traumatic for anybody, never mind a 15 or 16-year-old lifeguard who doesn't have the life skill set yet to be equipped. I mean, this would be damaging to anybody, but it is particularly concerning when we talk about potentially damaging young people for life through a job that they wish to have, but never anticipated the consequences. I consider myself very lucky in my aquatic career. There have been very few majors, serious injuries, only a few fatalities, most of which I was not directly involved with. They happened while I wasn't at the facility or while I wasn't on shift. And so it's definitely something that bigger facilities or higher traffic facilities definitely experience and need to be prepared to treat their staff and help them, support them. One interesting point I wanted to mention from ILCIRA, which I thought was really, really interesting. Tyler was talking about how the organization wants to move away from the terminology debriefing, as administrative staff, aquatic managers cannot do like a medical, forensic, psychological debrief in the way that therapeutic professionals can, but an after action review or talking about the incident, that is certainly a good idea, but how do we frame our language around that? I also want to mention that Tyler Anderson, who is involved with ILCIRA, his background is in managing critical response to incidents in the airline industry. So he does have a lot of professional experience that lends itself to something like this. This is not something that is without research or without medical basis. There is actively protocols and procedures that are being developed and researched. And there's also the study that they're currently doing with regards to lifeguard responses. So it's something that is relatively new over the last couple of years. It may be something that is interesting to your organization. So that is why I shared the link in the newsletter. I have our weekly anonymous advice column linked. Please feel welcome to share any questions, ideas, thoughts that you have in that field. I hope to be addressing next week one of the questions that came in recently. I did want to do a quick reminder that our spring certified pool op classes are coming up very shortly. So just this past week, we completed the April Zoom CPO class, 4 days times 4 hours. Coming up shortly, have our next certified pool operator. This is where you complete the pool operator primer modules on your own time, asynchronous learning, and then you only come to 1 day of Zoom with me 4 hours of review, 3-hour test, and a lunch break, and that gets you the same pool operator certificate for 5 years with the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance. This option is really good for young people who are comfortable with online learning. This option is also really good for anybody whose schedule is completely ridiculous and they can't find 4 days of 4 hours. This is also a good option if you are recertifying your CPO. So you've done this class before, you've been working in the industry for a while, and so you do want to learn, but you may be at a different place in your professional journey from somebody who's just starting out with no pool background. We do have a 4-day Zoom CPO coming up at the end of May. So that is one of the big things I wanted to mention is typically people are concerned about having their pool operator certificate in advance of the May long weekend, which here in Canada is Victoria Day, in the US is Memorial Day. But either way, that's coming up very fast in less than a month. And having that CPO certificate done is one less thing off of your plate. So get in on the CPO Fusion if you'd like. Otherwise, that next class is going to be after the long weekend, which may not work for you. To our most recent lifeguard video. So if you are starting here in Canada, I made a video pertaining to views. This was heavily requested over the last year that I've building out our National Lifeguard series playlist. And then further down, I have a link to last week's newsletter recording, which I did have to do several times because of technology issues. In the National Lifeguard series, I do have another video coming up here shortly regarding this toe turning technique. And I do have other videos in queue regarding egg beater, as well as interviews with individuals who were deaf lifeguards, right? They have hearing impairments. That's coming down the pipe, as well as my 80-minute presentation on the commercial use of residential pools. I'm also catching up on my vlogs. Those are second tier, obviously, to the primary purpose, which is aquatic content, but recently released an Icon of the Seas vlog, working on parts 2 and 3. Those should be out in the next couple of days. And then I'll be tracking back to catch up on all my footage from the fall of 2025. So my footage from the World Water Park Association conference, Typhoon Lagoon, day and night, the IAPA conference, and then I have at least one other full cruise that I vlogged in January that I have not shared, as well as partial content from February, including the Nassau Beach Club in the Bahamas. So plenty to keep me busy as we head into summer pool season. I am so grateful that you're here with me and that you listened to this. If you found this video helpful, please do consider sharing, subscribing, giving it a link. If I got it completely wrong, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye for now.